Today's topic is modern drum vocabulary. So we started off with what separates a beginner from an intermediate. Then we talked about what separates an advanced player from an intermediate player. Now we're not really dealing with whether you're advanced or not. This is just sort of the vocabulary that we use in modern drumming. So this isn't meant to be like an exhaustive list, and a lot of this I'm going to relate back to this book, Groove Exercises for the Drum Set. So you could maybe say this is sort of like a modern groove vocabulary way to play this material. Maybe that's a little bit more precise way to what to call this lesson. But I'm just going to kind of run over what I think are like the modern day essential grooves that haven't been done anytime before today. So let's get started. Okay, so I start my world of drumming with modern backbeat drumming. So, right? I say that is the beginning of all modern drumming. Everything that we do on the drum kit is built around modern backbeat. 4/4 time, even subdivisions. If you go back and study jazz, they're going to say that it's based off 4/4 time with triplet subdivisions, right? 1 2 3 2 2 3 3 2 3 4 2 3, and then you get like swing. Not starting there. We're starting modern. And I get it, there is modern jazz, but most modern jazz isn't swinging anymore. Most modern jazz is straight. So, if we assume that, everything that's been done so far on drums has been done already, and there's already books on everything. So if you want to know how to play rock beats, there's books on that. If you want to know how to play, funk beats, there's books on that. There's lots of great books on that. Let's talk about the type of beats that there's not a lot of resources for, or the type of education. It doesn't even have to be books. Just what kind of beats aren't really in the modern vocabulary of educational material. So the first place I would start, the most modern thing, I think, is smaller subdivisions, specifically like 30-second notes. So if I've got one quarter note here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I split that in half, I get eighth notes, 1 and 2, and split that in half, I get 16th notes, 1 E and 2 E, and split that in half, I get 30-second notes. Okay, that subdivision really is sort of pretty modern. I think it started maybe around fusion time is when we started playing 30-second notes a lot more. So using them as fills is probably the most common thing. So you've got like... What I'm playing doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what combination of notes. It's the subdivision. So 30-second notes are something you need to get under you need to get them in your ears first. You need to be able to hear 30-second notes, and then you also need to be able to get your hands to do it. Since we're focusing on grooves today, let's switch over to 30-second notes on our hi-hat. So straightforward, most easiest example would just be alternates. Right? You could do paradiddles. You could do those like... You'll notice the tempo's slow. We'll get into that next. But slow tempos with lots of fast notes between these big points of kick, snare, kick, snare. Whoop. Gotta back up. So those subdivisions just aren't really in music. They didn't really come around until recently. You're not going to see them in a lot of books from the 70s. except in fills. So let's talk about maybe 3 or 4 ways we can voice 30-second notes. Like I said, alternates. Doubles, kinda. But the problem is when you're bringing your snare over, you got doubles on your snare. So kind of clunky, not really so great. What I like better than that is inverted doubles. So that's right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right. So and you get this sweeping thing. A double split between the hi-hat and the snare going down, thankfully. That would be terrible. So okay. Alternates, inverted doubles. I think paradiddles is probably where you want to start. I know I talk about paradiddles a lot. It's because they're the best. They're just so useful. So you got all 4 paradiddle inversions. The next one is right, left, left, right. The next one is right, right, left, right. And the next one is right, left, right, left, left. So on and so forth. So number 1 basic modern way to practice this book, go back to the beginning, play everything with 30-second note subdivisions. You can also permutate your bass drum by 30-second note subdivisions as well. That's really small. So if you're doing like, and I want to move it one subdivision over, so I'm going to have 7 subdivisions per quarter note to move my kick. So the first subdivision, let's move it. Yeah. Next. And all those subdivisions matter, you know. They're all good places to be able to feel grooves, you know, especially if you're playing something fast. All right, let's move to the next subject, and then I'll come back to 30-second notes. So the next most important thing is kind of wrapped up in what we were just talking about, what I would call trap beats. You know, that's the most common use, most common feel, most common genre of music that uses this feel. I guess the more bland technical music term would be like halftime grooves. What I'm talking about is basically the same thing, just really slow halftime grooves. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I were to play like the most traditional trap beat, that would be like 1, 2, and 4. 1, 2, and 4. That is definitely a modern feel. You're not going to find that in a lot of music from before probably the 2000s, right? And now it's everywhere. Pop music, hip-hop, electronic music, it's everywhere. I mean, you hear it in jazz, too. And what ties in with that is 30-second notes. Since we're going so slow, we do hi-hat fills. And, we'll get to this, but an overarching theme is that's not a drummer-invented thing. That's a producer-invented thing. So a lot of what influences our hi-hat vocabulary is what guys on laptops are doing. So let's take just the same thing. 1, those are all 30-second notes that I'm filling in. They don't seem very fast now, but if you've got a hotter tempo, those are 30-second note triplets. So I've got again, really small subdivisions and big grooves. So that just concept of small subdivisions with big kind of like nodes between your kick, snare, and then all this crazy small filling in stuff, that in general is like a modern concept that you need to incorporate if you're going to sound modern. Okay, so trap, halftime, 30-second notes, those two are kind of wrapped up in each other, right? Let's move on to the next feel. The next feel, a little older, but still cropping up every once in a while. It's what I call drum and bass. Aphex Twins, Square Pusher, Ronnie Size. There's all these great producers that made a lot of awesome drum and bass stuff. For people who aren't familiar with that but maybe need a drumming reference, that's like Jojo Mayer, right? All that drum and bass is, the actual history of drum and bass is it's one groove, the Amen break, I think it's called, that just is sped up. It's something like that. It's some sort of feel basically like that. Producers took it, chopped it up, sped it up twice as fast. And now the sort of the vocabulary aspect of it, how you play that fluidly, is these starts and these stops, like here's a really, and then you just keep doing that. Again, this vocabulary is influenced by producers. This isn't drummer influenced. This is producers taking existing drums, chopping them up, and then drummers hearing that, playing it, imitating what somebody did on a laptop. It's really cool, actually. You can look for your inspiration outside of the drum kit really easily. So what this is based off of, the most technical way to say this, it's just a fast kind of 16th note groove. It's this type of groove, just sped way up, which means technically you're going to need to be very light. Okay, so maybe the next sort of second level of that is what I just did, that sort of displacing the beat, which you get that from your James Brown vocabulary, that all the James Brown stuff. That like, where's the one feel? That's a James Brown trick. A Clyde Stubblefield Jabbo Starks trick. You do that at high tempo, sounds great. So you've got you leave the 2 off, you leave the 4 off, you kind of displace the beat, right? So that's like the second level of drum and bass grooves. The next level is coming up with new sticking patterns. One that's really great is the paradiddle. Oh my gosh, there they are again, paradiddles. This paradiddle voicing. Do a really fast paradiddle. Accent that second note, second quarter note. That's a left hand. And then your hands are pretty much set. They're just kind of going to do that the whole time. And then your bass drum is the thing that improvises. So. Cool, right? Easy to play. Conceptually, it's pretty advanced, but technically, it's not that hard. Just need to have some basic bass drum freedom. How do you get that basic bass drum freedom? Practice that hand pattern over these exercises. You keep coming back. Let's just play the left side of this page. 1, 3, 5, 7. Number 2, or number 3. Number 5. Number 7. See? Easy. And I just have 4 totally great grooves that I can play. Sounds like, oh my gosh, it's so advanced. Not advanced at all. Very simple. The next level up from there, as far as drum and bass grooves would be concerned, I'd say is alternate voicings. Everybody's favorite, the little splash cymbal hanging out on a drum. Splitting up your voices. Again, simple sticking pattern. Let's just stick with those paradiddles. Again, I'm barely thinking. I just have my hands in 3 places now instead of 2. And this drum and bass feel, it's not strict. You don't have to stick to that. People aren't really playing straight drum and bass anymore. You listen to like Mark Juliana, you listen to like Lewis Cole, DeAnthony Parks. Nobody's really doing, maybe they do sometimes, but more of the time it's kind of like this sort of thing. So, modern vocabulary, left foot, 8th notes. If you want to sound quote-unquote modern, or just what's going on in modern drumming, left foot is kind of the new right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 16th notes, right? But if I've got this free, or if I've got this set doing the role that my right hand used to do, now my hands are free to kind of play more melodically. You can do whatever. You can just kind of make up your own nice little 3-voice improvisation going on here. Left foot is doing the work of the right hand. So let's call that like 3.5. Number 4, kind of way to sound modern. It's actually a little bit of a throwback. I'm going to say it's the Purdy groove family. So, oh my gosh. I hope you guys know what a Purdy groove is. Been explained to death. It used to be like the secret drum groove that everybody could do. Now it's kind of cheesy, just to be honest. You can't really bust out a Purdy groove as is and expect the drummers in the audience to not kind of be like, oh, here you are. So what a Purdy groove is, or what is it? Oh man, I haven't played it straight as it is. And then you got what, like Rosanna? Oh, that's Fool in the Rain. Sorry, Rosanna is. Right? It's a cool groove. It's great, but you can't really do it anymore. Just like you could never play like, or what, you just can't play that groove. It's one person played it. You can't play that anymore. Kind of the same with the Purdy Shuffle. It's a really cool groove, but you can't do it as is without getting in some trouble. But you can do things based off of that concept. And what that concept is like Bernard Purdy calls it like 3 times going on at once. You've got your half time, your double time, and your swing time. And they're all mixed in together. And I don't remember how he breaks it up again. Watch the video. It's great. Classic. So we can take that concept of having what David Garibaldi calls like internal voices going on between the hi-hat and the snare, and then like a halftime or whatever kind of moderate tempo going between our backbeat and our kick. So you've got really 2 sound sources, and then you've also got and right. So those can be playing one voice, one concept, and then these 2 can be saying a different thing, which in a Purdy Shuffle it sounds like. So if you're counting accents and taps as different voices, it's kind of a 4-voice thing going on. There's these internal voices, the ghost notes, but the really important notes you're accenting. Right? Okay, so we can build grooves using that sort of concept. If you've got like a triplet or a swung feel, you start just adding internal voices. I'm sort of improvising just to kind of show you guys, but you can stick to patterns. You know, you could be like, I'm doing like a right, 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 left, right, right, left, right, right, left, right. Sticking doesn't matter, voicing doesn't matter. I'm just saying this concept of an internal groove going on inside of what's going on with your big notes. Okay, let's add a 4.5 here. I just caught myself doing it. Left foot as part of the phrasing. Instead of just being left foot as timekeeping, your left foot can be part of your groove. Right? So if I back to that Purdy shuffle feel. Right? And then you've got, 5 voices going on? I mean, it depends on how specific you want to be, but you got a lot of inner voices and dynamics and like inner things going on. It makes your groove sound much more, again, kind of like a produced thing and not just like somebody, there's all these inner voices going on. So Purdy shuffle family is what I would call that. Let's see if I can think of... that's one I like a lot. This is a... That's not a Purdy shuffle, but it sounds a lot like one. So I've got... So I'm substituting my kick for one of those triplets. I'm doing a little bit of a Purdy shuffle. A little bit of that, but not quite. And then I come back with a... What do I do? Yep, so I've got triplet, 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 triplet. First half. Second half. So it's triplet, triple kick, triplet, triple kick. Kick. Right? And then sometimes I'll switch it up. Once you get comfortable with that, it's just sort of a way of phrasing, this sort of linear triplet. Doesn't have to be triplet, but most of the time it's triplet. Linear triplet phrasing stuff. Just put it all in the basket of Purdy shuffle family. Okay, last style of modern drumming that we're going to go over. Broken beats. So overplayed, right? Everybody knows it. It was huge like 5 years ago. let's talk about why it's cool, and then we'll talk about why it's not cool. Why it's cool is because it breaks all the rules. What are the rules? Play your notes together. That's the only way you sound good as a drummer, is if your notes are together. Then along came two people, Jay Dilla, Chris Dave. Jay Dilla, the producer, Chris Dave, the drummer. What did they do? They broke that rule. That's what pioneers do. They broke it. The one rule is your notes have to be together. What did Dilla do? Make beats where the notes weren't together. So instead of we've got everybody the first time they hear that goes like, what's happening right now? I can't believe it. This sounds so crazy, because you've got your ears trained. It's like if we changed the standard pitch to 442, right? Everybody would be like, everything just sounds different. I've never heard this before. It's even more extreme than that. So how do you play broken beats? If you don't know, you just put one thing first or last. So instead of, you do or. So you've got is the old way. Here's the broken beat way with your snare first. If I was playing both here, it'd be like, AKA kind of a flam, right? You could put your hi-hat first. Same thing with your bass. Together. Bass first. Bass second. So you could take something really simple, like number 5 from lesson 1 in this book, and just play it together. Now put bass and snare before hi-hat. Put bass and snare after hi-hat. Now you could do like bass before, snare after. Wait, bass before, snare after. You could do it backwards. What would that be? Bass after, snare before. Sorry. Whatever. You can go on. It's super easy to improvise with this stuff. But why should you not improvise with this stuff? Because it's played out. Super played out. Just my opinion, but I'm just saying. It's one of those things, kind of like the Rosanna Shuffle. When I hear a drummer like Chris Dave play that for the first time, I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Now, when I hear other drummers do that, I'm like, oh, they just really got into broke beats, and they want to do that. It's such a strong vocabulary choice that you just can't bust it out. Also, it's not appropriate for lots of stuff. It's just so not appropriate for tons of music. If you're on a folk gig, don't do this, right? So, why should you practice it at all? Well, little chunks. Sometimes it's cool. Just maybe one note in a song should be displaced, right? Maybe somebody actually says, I want you to do a straight up broken beat. It's like, okay, cool, I will. But me personally, if I have the choice, I'm never going to play that, because why would I? Chris Dave does it. It sounds great when he does it. Just like I'm never going to do a Rosanna Shuffle unless I'm playing Rosanna. But it's really good exercise for working on your transients, aka your notes lining up. So you could be like, really work on getting that note placement and that alignment. This isn't an exhaustive list by any manner. This is just what I would say is 5, 6-ish ways that you can go back through and play this material with a modern feel. So the last point I want to make, which has sort of gone through everything, is where we're getting our influence from as far as modern vocabulary. the drum set is the newest instrument, and yet it's also becoming like obsolete faster than almost any other instrument. The reason why is because we've got laptops and we can program beats, and the programming today is really good. I mean, half of what I produce when I'm making music, I just use drums on my computer because they sound great and it works great. That's not a bad thing. Doesn't matter. The world is still going to need drummers, but we live in a post-laptop drums world. So what that means for your vocabulary is you shouldn't just listen to drummers for vocab. Like Mark Juliana is great, and Nate Wood is great, and Lewis Cole is great, and Nate Smith is great, and Chris Dave is great, but all of those guys, all of their phrasing is coming from stuff other than the drums. So if you want to really get your modern vocabulary in order, you need to just go listen to modern music and emulate that. Jojo Mayer calls it reverse engineering. He listened to a bunch of drum and bass and said, how can I get my body to do this thing that wasn't done by a human? He made it happen. 30 years before he did that, people would have been like, that's not even doable. Same thing with Chris Dave. His is more of a conceptual thing, but where you get your influence from doesn't have to be the drums, especially for modern vocabulary. Okay, cool. So that's going to do it for this lesson. Thank you for sticking around for my conceptual talks. We'll be back to more strictly technique and exercises for next week. If you have any questions in the interim, you can send me an email at thedrummerbrain@gmail.com, Instagram @thedrummerbrain. Follow me on YouTube @thedrummerbrain. Hope you guys have a great week. Happy drums to you all. I'll see you on Monday for hands. Bye-bye.